Welcome to the Journey Podcast, the podcast that's all about you. The podcast that interviews interesting guests and listens to their journeys of where they've been, where they are now, and where they are going. Well, welcome to the Journey Podcast. Today we have with us Jim Young. Now, Jim Young is a really interesting guy because he comes from a background very similar to the career I'm in right now, and that's a managed service provider. And I'm really excited to hear his journey to where he's come from and what he's doing now. And Jim does a lot of really neat things. Just gotten to know him here recently. And Jim not only does coaching for businesses, but he's also an improv comedian. So really looking forward to maybe a lighthearted and just a great conversation with Jim today and learning all about him and his journey. How are you today, Jim?
I'm great, Nate. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I've really appreciated finding some of the intersections that we have together and excited to explore the questions that you have.
Yeah, that's great. I really am glad that you are here, Jim. And I know we'll probably get into this in the episode as we go. I read that you have an upcoming book coming out, so that's really exciting. So something for our audience to go check out more about you. But tell our audience what you do, who you are, and what it is your business is.
My business is called The Centered Coach, and that came from an exercise I was doing prior to starting the business, where I realized what I wanted to do in life was help people find the calm, centered place from which they do their best at work and in life. It was literally the words that I wrote down in a visioning exercise several years ago. And I realized I'd been stuck in a job, in a career that had run its course. I had been through multiple bouts of burnout in a corporate IT career that lasted about 22 years.
Wow.
And I went off and decided to do something completely different. And without really a plan, I resigned. And about a week later, had this epiphany in a conversation with somebody that coaching was the thing that I really loved to do the most. I love to support people in developing a more balanced life, a more sustainable life for themselves. I loved supporting teams and organizations coming together. And I was like, oh, I get to do that for a job. So I built a coaching practice that, I'm in my fourth year now running that business and really enjoying it.
Well, that's awesome. So the Centered Coach. So you started in an IT career and worked in that for, you said 22 years. How did that shape what you are doing today? Maybe a little bit more details about that.
Yeah, I had an accidental IT career back in the late 1990s as the Y2K bug, if for those listeners out there who remember that, when we
Yeah.
the world was going to stop with a 4-digit year that the computers needed to calculate. I got hired into a job in a Boston law firm with basically no experience, but a lot of attitude and aptitude, as my boss put it, and came to love IT right away. I loved solving problems. I didn't know that I had this ability, but I quickly discovered that I did, to help solve these problems with technical systems that ran a business. But more so, the calling card for me, almost right out of the chute, and really for the next 20 or so years, was that I could translate. I could help a senior leader in an organization, a manager, whomever, a secretary, a lawyer in that firm, understand how to use the technology or how it worked or what it meant. And I could also then translate what they needed back to the other technical people. And those were really the seeds for me of my coaching career. Much, much later, I didn't realize it for a long time, but it was in building relationships and seeing where people struggled and how they could ask for things that they needed, how they could grow into areas where they didn't feel comfortable, and supporting that through relationship skills. I had a non-traditional IT career, certainly not a planned one. And what threaded me through that really was the people side of things.
Wow, that's awesome. So you've experienced burnout a couple of times through your career. So one question that comes to my mind is, how does one know they're burnt out?
I liken it to the analogy of if you have a frog in a pot of water and you keep turning the heat up, um, versus if you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water. That if you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water, it's going to jump right out. Burnout happens so slowly. In my experience and the experience of many other people that I've talked with about it and coached around it, we don't necessarily know it until it's happened. And
Mm,
a lot of times people characterize it as a brain fog, or the classic definition is exhaustion, mental, emotional, physical, degree of cynicism or a cynical approach. This is never going to get better. That kind of talk, and a feeling that you can't get things done well, a lack of efficacy or ability to accomplish your job. Those are the three core symptoms of burnout. So people experience them in different ways and in different combinations. And there's an active conversation I've had with other folks who are focusing on burnout. Can we prevent burnout, or can we simply treat it once it's happened? Um, I think it really happens in the course of thousands of decisions over a period of years.
hmm. That's good. And yeah, maybe through that, are you teaching people how to maybe recognize it sooner than they were the last time, and each time getting a little better?
Yeah, what I think I try to do most of the time is help people understand what is driving their burnout. So first of all, which of those symptoms are you feeling? How do you know that you're having them? Because a lot of people are, trying to just get through, and they're powering through situations and maybe not even recognizing, because it's so cultural. You ask somebody, "Hey, how's it going?" They're like, "Oh, I'm super busy." It's such a common response.
Right.
What's really going on? Like, are you recognizing maybe that there's something where you're feeling exhausted? So helping people identify, what are the symptoms? Are you feeling those? And then what's behind it? What's the pattern? And oftentimes we get into some deep stuff about beliefs. What do I believe about myself if I do this or don't do that,
Right.
that lead us down that path?
Yeah, that's awesome. So, you've been doing coaching, you said, for 6 years, and what would you say is one thing that you really didn't expect through this coaching journey?
Hmm. Since your podcast is focused a lot on entrepreneurs, this probably rings some bells for other people. As I got into business without really knowing what I was getting into. Being a coach is just like being, lots of other business types. The commonality for me is as an entrepreneur, realizing how many hats I have to wear, how much energy I have to focus on different aspects of the business, the administrative side, the sales and marketing side, actually delivering service in my case. And I didn't know how much I would learn about all these different disciplines. I also have learned a ton about things that I never would have spent time on otherwise, like marketing. How do I get my brand message out there in a consistent way, and connect with the right people?
Yeah, all those things that you don't think about when you go to jump in. You say, "I'm going to do this," and then there's a lot of strings attached to that. So within that, you say you're a coach. If you're a business coach or a life coach, people probably have different things they bring to it. What would you say is the most common myth about what you do?
There are some really great YouTube videos about life coaches. Go ahead and Google them. They're
Okay.
super funny. And I think there are some tropes about coaches that, it's just getting people to be in this blissed out state, meditating on a beach. Those are some of the funny tropes. And I'm not sure what's wrong with that, actually. There's a great meme that I saw not too long ago of, one side of it, somebody like stressed out sitting in this crazy traffic snarl, and then somebody sitting, on a mountain peak meditating in the lotus position, and I forget what the exact words were, but it was basically saying, which one of these do we consider to be weird or crazy? And it's not the person sitting in traffic. So coaches, I think what I've gotten to know in the coaching community is that there are so many open-minded, open-hearted people who are looking for countercultural ways to look at the world and say, hey, have we lost our way a little bit here in terms of what some of the priorities are? Are we, as a mentor of mine says, just letting ourselves get should on all the time? The world's telling you what you should do here, what you should do there, instead of living through ourselves and saying, this is what I want out of my life.
That's really interesting. So, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you've had to face in this business, and how are you overcoming it, or how did you overcome it?
The number one challenge for me, full stop, is that I think men are more reticent to step in and do personal development work than women are. That's anecdotal largely, but I think there's some data around it as well. My female colleagues who pursue, or male colleagues who work with more of a female clientele, I think they have an easier time finding new clients, because I think for men, there's a big societal message that says, don't ask for help, go it alone, tough it out. You don't need any assistance. And to take the risk, the time, the money, the energy to go off and say to some other person, hey, help me out here. And it's really contradictory, because if we think about all the other ways that we might know the word coach in the world, basketball coach, swimming coach, people use coaches for really great reasons, except when we get into professional and life areas, we think, well, we should just be able to figure this out on our own. So, helping men come along and realize, like, it's okay. You don't have to figure it all out on your own. In fact, you can get further faster by opening up yourself to either working with a coach or working within a group setting. I do some group coaching as well. I think that's clearly the number one challenge that I've run into in my business.
So, do you think that's an American cultural challenge with men, or is that a worldwide problem?
It's a great question. I don't have a lot of context on other cultures. It's clearly in our country. I think there's, the John Wayne figure comes to mind, and really just a ton of the cultural messages that I grew up. I'm a Gen Xer, and that was really a big part of what I saw in my family culture, my community culture, and the broader culture as I was growing up, was that a man behaved a certain way, and it wasn't being vulnerable with your emotions. It wasn't reaching out and asking for help. It was pushing through. It was being this rugged individualist. And I tried that for a really long time. I wore that persona because I thought that's how I could fit in. And actually, when I didn't do that, I was subject to taunts, to abuse of not a on a major level, but you know, I was pushed out of the in group in school, even in the corporate realm. If I got a little too far into some of those behaviors that didn't seem manly enough, and it took me decades to come around and say, I'm not playing that game anymore.
Yeah, no, that's good. So maybe this goes without saying, but what's the most important lesson you've learned from your IT career to now?
Hmm. I'd say it's to, I love that question. I'd say it's to ask myself more often, what do I want? And to answer it honestly. And if I were to get a little more detailed on that, I would look at, what do I need and what do I want? And get really clear about both of those things. Because I think for a long time, I had this story in my head of what I wanted. And it was this version of success that I had picked up from the culture, from society. And I never tested, is that what I want? I was really just following a path that I thought, okay, this is going to get me where I want to be because it's the commonly accepted path. Rise through the ranks, gain more status in the organization, make more money. And I wasn't asking myself if I wanted those things. I wanted to be happy, and those weren't making me happy. I had needs, they were fulfilling. I have a family, I needed to provide for my family. but I wasn't asking myself what I wanted.
Hmm. That's really neat. It's a great answer. I really appreciate that. So tell me a little bit more about coaching. What would you think, in your opinion, is the most important thing for somebody to get into coaching? What personality strength or what type of trait do they need to really do that well?
I would say willingness is the number one thing, because coaching is going to invite change. And if you're willing to look at how things are going now, because most of my experience when people come to coaching, it's because they're looking for a change. So do I come with willingness? Am I willing to really dig it deep? I've had clients come to me and they want to tinker around the margins. They don't really
Mm.
want to change. And that's okay. They may not be ready for it, or maybe I'm not the right coach for them. There's, fit has to really be there. But if a client comes to me and they're not really willing to dig deep, then I know we're only going to get so far. And being willing to say, yeah, the ways that I've done things, what my beliefs were, the things that I say I value versus the way that I act aren't in alignment. Having that willingness, some humility goes along with that. I think that's the number one ingredient, because we're going to be looking at, for me anyways, in the coaching that I do, I want there to be a transformational change. I want to help people go to this level, this version of themselves that they didn't even know existed yet. And that requires you to push yourself. You have to go to a place that you haven't been to before.
Wow. And that's super important to go through that transformation. You mentioned mentors, though. Who would you say has been the most important mentor in your life?
That's I've had a few really good ones. I've got a couple right now who come to mind, but it's probably the very first one. I grew up in a family where my parents divorced when I was 2 or 3 years old, and I saw my
Mm.
dad once a week. I didn't have a very close relationship with him growing up. I didn't have a whole lot of male role models at all. And that carried forward into my adult life. And at about 40 years old, I recognized that I had not ever really connected with another man as a support resource. And I met this guy through an organization that we were both a member of, and I asked him if he would mentor me, and he was so willing to do that. He was very clear about how that would work. It would have to be mutually beneficial, that he would get something out of it, which confused me. Like, how could you get something out of mentoring me? Which I now see later on after having mentored folks. But he really taught me some super valuable lessons. Two that always jump right to mind when I think of my friend Dan are, um, showing up is the most important thing. That if we show up, if we're present, and we can do that consistently, good things will happen. Um, we'll also deal with difficult things, but showing up for all of it is critical. Um, and keeping the focus on myself, and that was a personal challenge for me. I always wanted to keep everyone around me happy at my own expense. It's a part of my
Mm.
burnout
Yeah.
pattern. The learning that I
Wow.
had to invest in myself. And it comes back to that question you asked before of what's the biggest lesson I've learned? What do I want? That's a question of keeping the focus on myself so that I can then be of service to others.
Wow, that's great. And you think that that's a lesson that probably everybody should learn, I would think.
To some extent, I've also experienced people who might keep the focus on themselves exclusively, or more than is healthy, and not
Mm.
enough on others. So I'd say it depends. I think there is a tendency for many people to say, let me just take care of other people's needs first, and not focus on their own.
Yeah, I can understand that. So, at what point in your, I think you mentioned it a little bit before, but you didn't really know what you wanted to be when you grow up, kind of thing. You fell into the IT career, and now you're in coaching. At what point did you decide that you wanted to be a coach and you want to pursue this?
I quit my job with no plan. I handed in a resignation letter to my boss. And I remember her saying to me at the time, I think she was concerned I was going to work for some competitive organization. And she said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I have no idea.
Wow.
I'm just leaving I'm in my mid 40s. I'm supporting a family, and I had some savings in the bank, but I remember just knowing that I needed to go and I needed to kind of pick my head up out of the sand so that I could see the opportunities around me. And it was 4 days later, I was having a conversation with an acquaintance that I happened to bump into about the work that I love to do, or about what I was doing. She said, I told her I just resigned with no plan, and she asked, "Well, what did you love doing?" Because I had no idea what I was going to pursue next. And I said, "Well, I loved helping people develop themselves and grow into these new roles and these new capabilities that they didn't realize that they had. And I also loved helping groups of people, organizations come together and work more effectively as a team." And she said, "Well, that's something that coaches do." And it was something that she had done, made that transition as well. And I had a couple more conversations with her. So it was within a week of making this radical decision to pull the ripcord on a pretty successful long-term career that I realized, oh, coaching is the thing that I've loved doing all along. Because I was doing that internally as a senior leader and executive in organizations, as a manager in organizations. And it took that, for me, it took a radical move and a fortuitous conversation to realize that coaching was the thing that I'd loved all along and that I could do that as a living.
Wow. And that's awesome. That's great. So, what would you say is one thing about your job that nobody else in your field really agrees with you about? You know, you get a bunch of you in a room and you guys are going to fight about this particular issue and you have a different opinion.
I would say it's probably leads into, you mentioned I'm writing a book, and I think that the book topic, that the topics that I'm combining, I don't know that other people agree with it yet. So there may be an argument or a fight around it.
Maybe that's why you write the book.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping to open some minds and provide some help to people. The book is on burnout and how men experience it or why they experience it. And then the key piece that I think is, I don't know if it's controversial or just maybe misunderstood, is that intimacy is the path to getting out of it. That's how we can prevent ourselves from being in burnout. Because when we have a broad, and I'm talking about a very expansive version of the word intimacy, not the euphemistic kind that's only about a relationship partner, romantic partner, but building intimacy into our lives and all of our experiences, whether that's emotional intimacy or intellectual intimacy or spiritual intimacy. There's a whole range of ways that we can bring intimacy into our lives and into all the relationships that we're in. And when we do that, we make ourselves healthier, happier people. We don't fall into conditions like burnout. And I think in particular, that is a challenging place for men because of some of the cultural narratives around being open about expressing ourselves and having feelings and things like that.
Interesting. That'll be an interesting read for us down the road. So tell us a little bit about your day. So because a lot of entrepreneurs, you mentioned we wear a lot of hats, you wear a lot of hats, I wear a lot of hats. So if you've done it for any amount of time, like you have, you've definitely built some productivity tools, productivity hacks into your day. Tell us a little bit about that. What would you say is your favorite productivity hack to just keep yourself going?
I'm a creature to my calendar, so that's the first thing that jumps to mind is I need to be scheduled. And when I am trying to connect with people, and I connect with people all the time, even though I'm naturally an introvert, I'm an extroverted introvert. I love having conversations like this. I love meeting new people. So I use an online calendar tool so that I don't have to ping back and forth 6 emails to find a time to meet. So that's a simple productivity hack for me, is to automate some of those routine things that I might otherwise be pulling my hair out because I have, 100 emails stacking up that and email kills me. I've gotten so much worse at email over the years.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful, especially with your technical background of maybe utilizing some of those great tools that are out there to just better leverage those. if you take the time to set those up at first, because there's a ton of great tools out there, but if we don't actually take the time to build them for ourselves, then it's really pointless to have it.
Absolutely. And that's where businesses like yours and the business I used to work in can be so helpful, is we have people like ourselves, and my skills are probably not as sharp as they once were. But I know, for example, in writing my book, I do a lot of interviews. And so I do those interviews on Zoom, and I have that connected to a transcription service that automatically pulls the recording and transcribes it. And now I have all the notes, and the technology does it for me. I know how to set it up, so I didn't have to work with an MSP. But if you don't, those are the kinds of things that you either won't do them because you think it's just too hard for me to get all of that data, so I'll just take notes during the interview, and you miss half the gold. Or you try to do it and you fumble around and it doesn't work and you give up. So I'm a big fan of leveraging the right service providers who can bring their gifts to the table, so I don't have to do the things that I'm not good at, and I get to bring my gifts because I'm focused on the right things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's interesting. This connects to another interview we have in this series here, and talking about rest. So how important would you say as a coach and rest for entrepreneurs, taking days off, vacations? Because I get a lot of flack for how much vacation time I take. And I said, I didn't get into this business for it to kill me.
Yeah. I'm just curious, how much vacation time do you take?
I took 22 days of vacation time in 2021. So that was a huge win. In 2021, I left the continent. So it was a huge win for me. So
That's awesome. Good for you, Nate.
yeah.
I love hearing stories like that, because to me, rest is essential. There's a fantastic book by that name, by Rest. Alex Pang, I believe, is the author's name. And in it, he describes, all of these super creative, super productive people over the course of history who believed really strictly in rest, that we're not designed for this industrial age productivity schedule of 8 to 10 or 12 hours a day. That's a machine. That's what an assembly line was designed for, and we put people on those, and then we translated that into what most people, or many people, are today as knowledge workers. And our brains don't work that way. We need rest. So for me, rest is essential, and there are a lot of variations. I love, the example you gave of like 22 vacation days, like taking real vacations. I'm not working next week. I have a half day on Monday, but I decided I'm not working Tuesday or Wednesday. Thursday's the Thanksgiving holiday, and Friday is the day after. So I got a 1-day week next week, because that's what I want. That's what I want for my holiday. The other thing I do with rest is I make sure I build it into the day. And a lot of my rest wouldn't look like rest in the traditional sense to many people. My rest is often I go out for a walk. I walk probably 5-6 miles a day, and usually a couple of different stretches. And for me, that's a rest of getting up away from my desk, away from a screen, being in a big setting in nature, just walking around my little town here. And my brain is at rest, even though my body is moving.
Yeah.
And it restores me. And
Yeah.
sometimes I take a nap, because I'm over 50, so I got to take naps every once in a while.
Naps are great. I think naps are underrated. And maybe this goes into this, but what would you say are the most underrated tools that are indispensable for your job? Maybe we can make one naps.
Yeah,
So
nap is absolutely an underrated. It gets so much flack, like, you're lazy or something. And no, it's such a good reset. Although don't take too long of a nap is one thing that I've learned scientifically as well as by practice. Other tools, I mean, as an IT guy, I'm really former IT guy, I'm really capable of working with technology. And so I use it regularly to make my life easier. And I don't know if I could pick a favorite. I use so many different tools. I guess I would say, I don't want to promote any of the big platforms, but there's one of the big platforms that I use as my.
that's okay. They aren't a sponsor yet. So
Okay. So if Google ever becomes a sponsor, I've kind of surrendered, and I don't know if this goes against the cybersecurity, gurus out there, but I've kind of surrendered to the fact that like my data is already, out there to everybody, and I provide, I keep the things that need to be safe, but I'd love that I can sign in to all of my favorite cloud-based apps for my business with my Gmail account. I don't have to
Mm.
I don't have to maintain 25 passwords anymore. I use the integrated logins where Zoom lets me log in with my Gmail account. Otter lets me log in with my Gmail account. So making use of things like third-party authentication or single sign-on is maybe a geekier tool than some of your listeners might consider. But for me, it's such a time saver.
I'm going to use it. I'm going to say the coach says single sign-on is what you need. So I'm going to
Yeah,
cut the video up and just put that right out there. So if
right. Single
anybody argues
sign-on
with
is
me,
what you need.
yeah. All right. So Jim, if you could start a different business tomorrow, what would that be?
Oh, my work is pretty damn close to being aligned with my personal passions, which is great. And if I were to take it to one other level, I love community-based activities that have a ton of variety and especially create activity and fun in them, and play I think is essential to us, as adults. So it's probably something around retreats or some sort of active social place where men can connect in a variety of different ways to get to know each other better, to be able to create bonds. There's a great podcast episode I listened to recently that talked about the male friend recession. So many men in our country, and it's true of women to a lesser extent, but so many men have 3 or fewer close social contacts, and there was something like 19% of men in our country, according to the survey, had 0 close social contacts.
Wow.
And to me, that's so frightening, because I heard you talking on a podcast recently about mental health and suicide statistics, particularly in your industry, and that cuts across a lot of the male demographic. My demographic, men in their 50s, is one of the highest peaks in terms of suicide rates. And I think a lot of that is because of isolation, in a sense of I don't have anybody, so therefore it doesn't matter if I just go away. And that's tragic to me. That's
Very.
preventable. You can create spaces where men can come together and feel like I've got a community. I got people who love me and people who care about me.
Yeah, and just knowing where to turn to those resources is so important for people. So that would be great. Maybe a Jim Young retreat in the future after the book launch. So
It might be coming.
might be coming. Okay, Jim, I appreciate you being on here. I got a couple of rapid fire questions here at the end for you. Okay.
All right, let's keep it.
Um, what are 3 books you would recommend for the audience and why?
Atomic Habits by James Clear, because the small changes that we make every day are how we make the big changes in our lives. One of my absolute favorite books. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I never know if I'm pronouncing his name right, because it's a fabulous story and it talks about a spiritual journey where you come back to yourself, which is where we all are, I think, eventually trying to get to anyways, is coming back to ourselves. That's 2. And the third would be the Book of Awakenings, the Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo. It's got a writing, it's a page every day with just some really deep wisdom that connects me to spirit and connects me to something bigger and grounds me. It's always inspiring.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for those. All right, another one. I'm starting a business today. What is one word of wisdom or advice that you would give me?
I don't know if I can go with one word. I'm going to say easy does it.
Okay.
I think pushing ourselves so hard creates stress in our lives. And as I heard you say on that podcast I was referencing before, the energy we bring into our business affects the entire business. If we can come into it with a sense of ease and trust that the process is going to carry us where it needs to go, I think we're a lot better off.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for that, Jim. So I've asked you a lot of questions today. I appreciate you being on the Journey podcast, but maybe there's one question that you wish I would have asked. And what would that question be?
Let's see. What did we not cover today? I guess a question about how I got into improv and how it's changed me.
Yeah, tell us about, how did you get into improv? How's that changed you?
So I have 3 kids. My oldest is 18. I also have a 16 and a 13-year-old. So yes, I have 3 teenagers and I'm still sane. They got into improv as an after-school activity about 9 years ago, the first one, and the other 2 followed in line. And about 6 years ago, I decided I need to check this out. And I went to a class and I took an all-day workshop and I realized, oh, this is home. I love this. And what it's done is it's rewritten my own operating system. I take risks in a different way now. I trust the moment a lot differently than I ever used to. I laugh a ton. I get to perform on stages regularly in rooms where dozens of people have come together for one express purpose, which is to laugh together, which is an uplifting spiritual experience for me. And I realized that every moment something could change one way or the other, to just be with it. So improv has been an essential ingredient for me. It helps me as an entrepreneur, that mindset. It helps me with creative brainstorming. It helps me with resilience. It's been one of the most unexpected gifts that I possibly could have gotten.
Well, Jim Young, I am so glad you were willing to come on the Journey podcast today. I learned so much and maybe created a few more questions in my own mind to help me on my journey today. Tell us where we can find you online, remind our audience who you are, and talk about your upcoming book as well.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Nathan. It's been a pleasure to be on the journey today with you. I really love what you're doing and getting more voices out here talking about this exciting place to be in entrepreneurial land, and sometimes challenging. So I love that you're providing sources for us. You can find me online. The easiest place to find anything about me is my website, thecenteredcoach.com. LinkedIn is another place to find me, Jim Young, or you can search for The Centered Coach. I have a page for that as well, and that's where I hang out most of the time. And the book is coming out. I'll be done with the manuscript in early March, and the book will be going to press for roughly around this time next year, maybe October of next year. Still working on what the title is, but it's going to be an exploration of why men get into burnout and how developing intimacy is the sustainable path to get out.
Awesome. Well, Jim Young, thanks for being on the Journey podcast today. It was certainly a pleasure. I look forward to talking to you again about your book when that time comes. And thank you so much for being a part of the Journey podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you too, Nick.